While entering the wastelands of the Fallout universe for the first time, many of you may have had questions that appear simple at first glance, even dumb, though as you play through the Fallout series, they were almost certainly eclipsed by the greater mysteries within the universe. Today, we're presenting you with Fallout's dumbest questions explained, so that these questions can possibly be answered and put to rest the idea that those questions were dumb in the first place, as many of them have only vague answers that require a bit of extra diving to conclude. What are stimpacks? Stimpacks are amongst the most useful items in the game, as players would most certainly have a hard time surviving the perils of the wasteland without them. They're pretty much essential to the story, as without the health regeneration that they provide, most large waves of enemies would not be possible to defeat without the occasional run, hide, health, and go back at it. Could you imagine how difficult the raid bosses, or even the nuke bosses of Fallout 76 would be if stimpacks were not easily acquired? You practically have to spam the stimpack hotkey during the raid to survive for even a few seconds, especially during the final boss Ultrasight Terror, as its sheer damage output is enough to wipe most teams in seconds. But what are stimpacks, and where did they come from? That might seem like a dumb question, but there isn't actually much we know about their origins. What we do know is that stimpacks are a handheld syringe-delivered medication that provides its benefits through direct injection into the bloodstream. Stimpack is short for Stimulation Delivery Package, and their payload rapidly boosts the body's own regenerative properties. The exact concoction within them is unknown, but what we do know is that they're loaded with a variety of healing medications and stimulants, appearing similar to a real-world EpiPen. They were originally intended to be used in conjunction with an autodoc, which is a miracle of pre-war medical technology in its own right, as it's capable of performing even the most complex medical procedures without requiring a full staff of qualified medical personnel laboring for constant hours to ensure that every incision is preformed with the utmost care. At some point, the stimpacks were released commercially on their own. Curiously enough, stimpacks can be used to heal injured animals as well, as in the Fallout Amazon series we are shown dog meat being healed by the ghoulified Cooper Howard. They can even be used on mutants, such as super mutants and ghouls, though their genetics are far beyond that of a normal human. The more common stimpacks are mostly apt at healing minor injuries, and not capable of healing the more severe wounds, leading to the advanced variant known as the Super Stimpack to be created. There are also additional variants, such as the Stimpack Diffuser, which distributes aerosolized stimpack healing in a localized area, diluted and even expired stimpacks, indicating that the fluid inside can expire or become diluted, as well as automatically injecting regular and super stimpacks for when you need healing, but can't waste time pressing buttons on your Pip-Boy to do it yourself. The Super Stimpack contains an additional vial of more potent healing chems, providing an exponentially increased healing effect. However, it should be noted that Super Stimpacks are known to cause minor tissue trauma to the healed areas, due to the potency of its medications. So, lore-wise, it's not really a good idea to rely on these more advanced stimpacks. Though an inventor and distributor is never mentioned for either the autodoc or stimpacks, we can find a very similar technology called health dispensers that were used by the United States military during the events of the liberation of Anchorage. These were manufactured by Lee Rapid Pharmaceuticals and use a very similar delivery method, which utilizes a hose, gauge, and needle. This could imply that the stimpacks we see throughout the Fallout series were also produced by the Lee Rapid Pharmaceuticals company for the civilian market. Unlike stimpacks, health dispensers are bulky and contain more than one usage. Whether this is true or not, it should be noted that players can actually find a recipe to craft stimpacks of their own using medicinal herbs during the events of the Honest Hearts DLC for Fallout New Vegas. This requires Brock flower and Xander root, rather, or not. Those are ingredients used in the production of actual stimpacks is anyone's guess. Where do ghouls originate? Starting out the Fallout series, we are led to believe that ghouls are merely a byproduct of living creatures mutated by prolonged and rapid exposure to radiation. As most creatures would have been killed by it, ghouls were molded by it into a form that bears a shocking resemblance to the mythical ghouls of old folklore. This process is known as ghoulification, and in humans seems to result in near immortality, with a side effect that they eventually go feral and forget all of who they were. The trade-off for that risk is enhanced regeneration of wounds, even the ability to completely regrow severed limbs or reattached fallen ones, with those limbs maintaining full function. Ghouls also boast a natural immunity to radiation exposure, with radiation exposure providing an even greater boost to their regenerative abilities. The ghoulification process renders those unfortunate enough to undergo it completely infertile, with most of their hair falling out and their skin resembling burn victims. The majority of the ghouls that players will come across are feral and will attack on sight, healing most Wastelanders to refer to as zombies, a slur to ghouls that comes from pre-war movies. Most Wastelanders consider them a separate species entirely, leading them them to become outcasts of society, and more than often, be shot on sight, as it's hard for many to distinguish them from the more common ferals that descended from the pre-war cities. After large populations were struck by nuclear radiation when the bombs were dropped, those feral ghouls rely solely on animalistic instinct and aggressively pursue any baseline human and potential prey they come across. This has led many non-feral ghouls to form their own societies, which often utilizes feral ghouls as protection. Though many ghouls continue to refer to themselves as ghouls, there are some individuals who prefer other terms for their kind, such as Doc Barrows, a ghoul doctor and scientist from the ghoul community of Underworld in the capital Wasteland, who prefers the term necrotic post-humans, or alternatively, post-necrotic humans. Of the many species that have been known to experience ghoulification, there are few that you may not have even realized were ghouls, with the most notable being mongrels, which are feral ghoul canines, and yaoguai, which are ghoul bears. Though it's unknown whether these ghouls are still feral, as some yaoguai are known to have offspring and mongrels can be found in packs, with even alphas leading them. Ghoul gorillas, playfully named ghoul-rillas, can also be found in the ruins of Nuka World during the Fallout 4 DLC of the same name in the Safari Adventure Zone, with their own human among them. Though many might believe that ghouls are solely a byproduct of the bombs dropping at the culmination of the Great War and the heavy radiation unleashed upon the wasteland after that, what many will eventually uncover is that there are plenty of ghouls that had already been ghoulified prior of that fateful day that would make the Fallout universe into what we know it as today. Curie will mention during encounters with ghouls that a doctor by the name of Platt predicted the future existence of ghouls, though it seems that ghouls may have already existed in the shadows prior to that. Isolated medical experimentation would be conducted prior to the Great War that would transform individuals into what would eventually go on to be known as ghouls, though many wealthy individuals would eventually seek out ghoulification as a means of attaining immortality. Experiments were conducted in hopes of creating a cure for radiation that sought to provide radiation immunity in anticipation of the nuclear holocaust that would come to pass. An unnamed company located in Boston, Massachusetts would experiment with such a drug, with a research assistant known by her last name, Peters, would volunteer to test such a cure on herself. Holotapes recorded by her can be found in an abandoned house located in the ruins of Charlestown during the events of Fallout 4. Her holotapes make it clear that in February 2077, she would expose herself to 6 sieverts of radiation before testing treatment serum, though, as it turns out, she was actually part of the trial's control group, so the treatment she administered was a placebo with no effects on the radiation that afflicted her, leaving one last farewell message to her parents in the event that her treatment failed. Though she had been given a placebo, she would succumb to the effects of the radiation, and instead of dying, she would instead become a feral ghoul, though in the mid-2020s, a man by the name of John McDonough would acquire the only remaining sample of this drug and sought it as a way to gain a new sense of self, seeking to cure his emotional instability and self-hatred. John would go on to change his last name to Hancock and found the town of Goodneighbor, acting as its mayor and a potential follower during the events of Fallout 4. During the recently released Fallout 76 expansions, The Ghoul Within, players were given the option to undergo a similar experiment and become a ghoul themselves. Meeting Parthenia Blankenship, a ghoul scientist and member of the all-ghoul faction known as the Revenants, who reside at Radiant Hills, she will offer the player the option to make their character a ghoul, using a serum she created. Her father was a general in the United States military, and was stationed at a nuclear missile silo in Appalachia, and her mother was in the picture, so she was given permission to live at the missile silo with her father. After a nuclear warhead malfunctioned during the start of the Great War and failed to lift off, she was abandoned by her father and left alone at the silo. Parthenia was an avid reader and would study the only paper material she had at her exposure, which involved laboratory equipment and military secrets. She would uncover experiment chemicals that had been transported from another location and seemed to exhibit advanced healing properties, leading her to conduct experiments on herself using the chemicals, which lead to her discovering the process of ghoulification. According to Parthenia, very little documentation had been provided with the chemical at the silo, and she was unable to determine where it had originated, though her research would allow her to become familiar enough that she can describe its molecular structure. Parthenia would discover that ultracite ore, when used alongside the chemical, would speed up the process of ghoulification, and by 2105, this was able to create an injection-free delivery method using an inhaler. Desmond Lockhart, a British international intelligence agent prior in the year 2077, would be amongst the global leaders and members of the intelligence community that sought to extend their lifespan and genetic ability in hopes that they could survive the bombs dropping and rebuild society. He would expose himself to controlled levels of lethal radiation, and perhaps even use the same serum that Hancock had obtained obtained and Peter sought to test, to make himself into a ghoul. He even reveals that he was not the only one to seek out ghoulification prior to the war, which could indicate that there are many more pre-war ghouls out there waiting for future installments to uncover. A criminal mobster by the name of Eddie Winter would experiment with radiation on himself after a physician in East Boston presented him with the theory that the right kind of radiation exposure at the right amounts could mutate human cells. He would coerce the owners of the Wicked Ship Company to smuggle him some nuclear materials, and with the help of his physician, he would undergo the experiment and transform into a ghoul in October 2077, living the next 210 years sealed inside a secret bunker in Boston that he had commissioned after he was alerted to the threat of nuclear war breaking out, only being discovered during the events of Fallout 4. Strangely enough, the company that had been creating the serum that would enable the willing to become a ghoul may have been Robco, or even the United States Army. As in the Commonwealth, there is a hidden robotics research facility underneath the Robco Sales and Service Center that had conducted transhuman medical experiments on prisoners given to them by the US military for the development of robobrains to use in the Great War. The facility was top secret, and workers would frequently disappear, with management establishing protocols for the quick destruction of evidence should it be needed. In a brig behind dozens of mechanically sealed doors, feral ghouls can be found deadlocked jail cells that had open-view glass ceilings, with an observation room above, so their transformations could be studied. Several of these ghouls can be found strapped to gurneys held on tracks in the floor that would carry them into laboratories for dissection, and they would be incinerated upon completion. There is a row of decontamination arches at a mandatory checkpoint along this track. Outside of the cells, human remains can be found, distinct from the ghoul remains, which generally remain restrained or imprisoned. In the research area, tanks containing the remains of feral ghouls can also be found. If this isn't enough to point the finger at Robco, because in Cranberry Bog of West Virginia, another Robco research center can be found that contained a feral ghoul sealed within an observation chamber underground. Why are radroaches big? Have you ever heard the old wise tale that cockroaches can survive a nuclear bomb? Well, shockingly enough, this is somewhat true, though not entirely. Amongst the first types of enemies encountered in every Fallout game after Fallout 2 are the radroaches, which are the ancestors of American cockroaches that have mutated over centuries to be far more massive and hunt in packs. Contrary to popular belief, while the name Radroach was introduced in Fallout 3, giant cockroaches had appeared in Fallout Tactics and were to reappear in Van Buren as well. Prior to the Great War, American cockroaches were already the largest species of cockroach commonly found in homes and commercial buildings. Known for their speed and ability to thrive in warm, damp environments, they are even capable of flying short distances and are often found in basements, sewers, and around pipes and drains. They're practically anywhere that they can find food. Because they're omnivorous and will eat almost anything, including normally toxic waste products such as grease, they can even chew through leather. With their dietary habits so diverse, perhaps what benefited American cockroaches the most is that they're capable of surviving for months without food, though they can only survive about a week without water. According to BBC Science Focus, a cockroach can only survive between 6 and 15 times the lethal radiation dose for humans, meaning that water sources that would have been rendered toxic to humans after the Great War could be ingested by cockroaches without a problem. So, while it is true that they're mostly immune to radiation, they can still be affected by it. We see that in glowing radroaches that might act as the ghoulified variants of their species, though they are shown to interact with the rest of their kind just fine. They're become so large after the war that they're about the size of a house cat, with a massive thorax that could fend off attacks from much larger predators, with their massive reinforced incisors. In numbers, they are capable of taking down and devouring much larger prey, including humans. So imagine smashing a cockroach just for a pack of much larger cockroaches to swarm out from the dark recesses of your house and attempt to devour you whole. Radroaches are no laughing matter, as they've been shown time and time again as being capable of taking down entire vaults. Such a threat that they are possibly the only reason why the Lone Wanderer was capable of escaping Vault 101 before its security could properly react, as they were dealing with a seemingly organized radroach attack. Radroaches, just like their pre-war counterparts, can be found in most places underground and anywhere that they might be able to eat across the entirety of North America. Some wastelanders, such as Ma June in the Fallout television series, use their ability to digest nearly anything to farm them as a reliable source of meat, though it's easy for them to grow into a problem if they're left to grow out of control, as a group of survivors from Vault 31 would learn after Ma June's Radroach farm was unleashed upon them. To more seasoned survivors, they're less likely to pose a challenge, as adept wastelanders can dispatch a pack of them if they're aware of the Radroach's approach. Radroaches are territorial and rather aggressive, but seem to be capable of distinguishing what targets are vulnerable vulnerable, as they will only attack when they feel threatened if they encounter a larger creature. Basically, all the traits that allowed their real-world counterparts, the American cockroach, to survive is further enhanced by their mutated size. But why are they so big? It turns out to be quite simple. Insects are poikilothermic, which means that they cannot maintain a constant body temperature and rely on external temperatures to regulate their heat. As temperatures suddenly rose due to the intense nuclear fallout that engulfed most of the planet, insect species experience thermal stress, which real-world research has indicated would affect their behavior and their size. As temperatures increase, some insects will become larger due to increased heat, though the impact of heat will also increase their metabolic rate and lead to more aggressive behavior. Since after the war, there were corpses everywhere, and no one left to smash them, cockroaches were able to feast on anything they could get their mandibles on, which allowed their size to grow until they reached a point of environmental stability where available food sources could sustain their size. It's possible that the FEV leaking out of research institutions and unfortunate vaults could have also impacted their growth, though due to them remaining largely intact in form, it's unlikely. Why are bottle caps currency? It might feel off to fans introduced to the Fallout series through the television series that bottle caps have become the de facto currency and the standard that generally every trader is more than willing to accept. As in the real world, we wouldn't think twice about leaving a discarded bottle cap in a trash receptacle to be sent to the garbage dump. They're generally considered not worth the effort in collecting, as they have no value, but in the Fallout series, they're universally sought after in the American wasteland, from California all the way to Boston. So why are bottle caps the standard currency? Prior to the outbreak of the Great War, Dr. Mobius, one of the Big MT think tank executives and a prominent scientist, predicted that due to their durability, portability, and that they can be instantly recognized, bottle caps would become one of the most common currencies accepted in a post-war North America, ultimately proving true. The first known civilization to use bottle caps as a currency and validate Dr. Mobius's claim would be the Hub, establishing its acceptance in the year 2093, with the Hub being a major trading station in New California due to its oasis that provided wastelanders with a source of clean water that traders originating from the Hub would use to establish it as a powerhouse. They would select bottle caps for one very important reason. They were limited. This is because the technology to manufacture new bottle caps had been lost, and if new bottle caps could be minted, the method used to paint their surfaces with the various pre-war logos had also been lost, which is why you can't forge fake Sunset Sarsaparilla Star bottle caps and have them accepted by Old Fetus for his treasure, as he was the pre-war robotic mascot for the Sunset Sarsaparilla Soda Company and would know a fake when he saw one due to the paint not quite matching what they would have done pre-war. With the lack of machinery to produce new bottle caps, this made counterfeiting efforts almost impossible. Even the metals used in their production would have to be made using a specific composition of metals in order for a bottle cap to be accepted as genuine. With only a limited number of bottle caps out there, it preserves their value against inflation, though caravan companies, such as the Crimson Caravan Company, would aggressively target counterfeiters and destroy machinery that could be used to produce more so that nobody could inflate the currency. Though not all bottle cap presses would be destroyed, caravan companies were allowed to keep a few to replace worn-out and damaged bottle caps, so that they could keep the currency stable. As all currencies need to be backed by some sort of standard, such as the gold and silver standards that were abolished by the United States in 1933 and replaced with the economic trust standard, the merchants of the Hub would support bottle caps as a common unit of exchange by backing it with pure fresh water. There's a chance that the common use of bottle caps on the East Coast could have spawned in Appalachia around 2096, which would have only been 3 years after it had been established in the Hub. In order to promote the release of Nuka-Cola Quantum, the Nuka-Cola Corporation would partner with the White Spring Resort of West Virginia. As part of the partnership deal, all of the robotic vendors found at the White Spring Mall were programmed to accept bottle caps instead of dollars, which allowed wastelanders who found the nearly intact resort to exchange bottle caps they scavenged for virtually anything they would need to survive in the post-apocalyptic world. After which, the prominent caravan company operating around the region, the Blue Ridge Caravan, would spread the use of the currency as they are known to have trade routes that extend all the way from Kentucky to Georgia. The thing is, we can't really be sure, as a lot of what was established in Fallout 76 is already fated to be destroyed in the time of Fallout 3, but there is a chance that bottle caps could have simply become the norm in the eastern half of America prior to whatever calamity would undergo the survivors of the Appalachian wasteland. Perhaps the most definitive answer for why bottle caps are the standard currency in the Fallout franchise comes from none other than Scott Campbell, a developer who worked on the first 2 Fallout games under the Interplay banner. He recounted the day that he and his fellow Fallout designer, Brian Fryermuth, began to spitball ideas for what the currency would be. They couldn't use a pure bartering system, as it would have been too difficult for players to understand the value of items. They were considering bullets, as they are definitely useful in the wasteland, but they scrapped that idea when they realized that people would be very hesitant to use things like machine guns, since every trigger pull would directly lower their bank accounts, and that level of financial restraint wouldn't be enjoyable. So Scott Campbell thought to himself, what shiny token-sized thing would you find strewn around the trash piles? Something common, but not so common as to be everywhere? And eureka, he came up with the idea of bottle caps. Scott especially liked that the sound of a string of bottle caps would be very similar to that of a coin purse. Bottle caps seem to have been an interesting conclusion to a dilemma that they needed to solve in a logical manner, cementing it as a staple of the Fallout franchise, and establishing a strong lore supporting its widespread use that would only continue to grow more prominent for years to come as trade routes between settlements grew themselves. Why is civilization stunted? Eventually, every fan of the Fallout series has that moment where they question why there has been such little growth in the nearly 220 years that the games and television show expand through. Why are there no larger civilizations? Communities like Diamond City, Good Neighbor, Rivet City, Megaton, and the NCR are the outliers, with the vast majority of wastelanders devolving into psychopathic raiders that will sooner try to eat you than prolong their lives through simple and honest trade. Raiders are everywhere. You don't have to go far from one raider outpost before finding another, with every raider faction being fiercely against one another, and many of them prefer to just butcher their victims rather than enslave them for labor. These raiders are cruel, committing vile acts on their victims and with little to no remorse, with no desire to ease their lives in the slightest by simply growing a farm. Could it be that there is one simple answer for why society has been unable to flourish in the post-apocalyptic hellscape that is Fallout? Sure, one could say that the abundance of chems available to the average wastelander could be why they're so aggressive. With junkies mainly being driven by the goal of achieving their next high, it's more than likely something far more different. There seems to be a far more sinister poison lurking just beneath the surface of the Fallout franchise that will effectively doom civilization for centuries onward, with the only civilizations to thrive being those who can reach untainted waters deeper within the Earth's crust. This shadowy truth could be that everyone is indeed suffering from prolonged exposure to lead. Such exposure is known to cause an increase in the likelihood of future criminal activity, often causing individuals to develop an especially violent nature akin to the raiders we see throughout the Fallout franchise. Studies have even shown that individuals with elevated levels of lead in their bone marrow and blood tissue will be more aggressive, destructive, and express antisocial behavior. This would affect individuals in a way that would lead to an increased likelihood to use chems, as lead poisoning will also hinder attention spans and decreased cognitive performance, making them more likely to abuse chems that would otherwise only be used to treat illnesses. It's very evident by the poor working conditions found in terminal entries throughout the game, with a general disregard for human life shown in the form of experiments performed on unsuspecting United States citizens. Environmental conservation and regulations weren't really a thing that people cherished pre-war. The Fallout timeline separates from our own around the end of World War II, in September of 1945, and laws preventing the use of lead pipes hadn't been passed until 1986 with the Safe Drinking Water Act. So it's very unlikely that the United States of the Fallout timeline ever committed to preventing the use of lead pipes, as they can still be found throughout the game series, and especially in Fallout 4 and 76, where they are used as weapons. With lead contaminating virtually everything, it's no wonder why aggression is the typical response that both humans and creatures of the wasteland undergo when they spot something that does not look like them. It's no secret that low intelligence bears prejudice and hate. More often, ghouls are subject to that hate more than any other group. We've seen what happens when groups are able to undergo the process of cleaning their drinking water and the ground soil where they harvest their crops. The Brotherhood of the East Coast was able to build an empire that allowed them to establish contact and even construct airships to travel across the continent and meet up with other Brotherhood chapters. This was only due to Lone Wanderer of Fallout 3 completing Project Purity and cleansing the Potomac River, one thing that greatly benefited society in that region. The NCR was able to achieve vast societal growth through the hub's oasis and developments in deep penetrating water purification systems, allowing their nation to read from LA to New Vegas, before collapsing and devolving due to external sabotage in the heart of their society that reintroduced the very contaminates that poisoned the minds of wastelanders before such achievements had been perfected. Areas like the ruins of Pittsburgh, now known simply as the Pit, are contaminated with so many toxins that only raiders who rule by brutal punishment and cruelty are able to survive, showcasing just how bad the toxins of the old world are continuing to doom the wasteland all these years later. This is the reason why the Sole Survivor, Lone Wanderer, and Vault Dweller are capable of achievements far beyond the average wastelander, as they're unaffected by the lead effects of prolonged lead exposure due to their upbringing having been spared the more rapid poisons unleashed upon society with the dropping of the bombs. Hopefully this video has helped you realize that in the Fallout universe, there are no truly dumb questions, and the answers for what seem to be simple questions can take us so deep that we are exploring long-lost secret laboratories and simulations meant to prepare soldiers for war overseas. This has been Fallout's Dumbest Questions Explained. If you would like to see Fallout's most powerful weapons explained, click the video on the screen.